Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Dan with Go Live, and we are talking about how to get your priorities straight. I think we hear about that all the time, but whether you're a junior, I mean, that's what today's episode is really for. But if you're also a 10th grader, or maybe if you're ninth and really worried about college and stuff, this is definitely going to help you a lot, making sure you get the most out of not so stressed out all the time. I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed, especially in the 11th grade. So today, I'm going to give you three easy tips, or I guess you can say perspectives, that'll basically help you get the most out of 11th grade, do your best academically while also holding balance with everything else, like testing and extracurriculars and all that stuff. So I'm going to start off today with a framework called the Rule of Three. Basically, I'm not sure where I learned this, but it's been true more and more as I find out the hard way, that one can only excel at the tops or maximum of three things at any given point in their life. So right now, for instance, chances are if you're in 11th grade, you're probably involved in more than three things, or three commitments, and that's probably what's kind of leaching some of your effectiveness at some of those things. Typically, when we commit ourselves to more than three things at the same time, we tend to find ourselves performing somewhat mediocre in either one of those things or almost all of those things that we're committed to. It's because we're stretched too thin, right? We can only multitask so much. And long story short, try to determine this kind of like if you were to fill which three slots, all right, that you have to fill, which ones are the most important for you. So if you're in 11th grade, obviously by default, I would think about this in terms of semesters, or if you're on the quarter system in quarters. But for the most part, a lot of our students on semesters. So let's say this current semester, which ends usually in December or January, right? What are the three slots that I really want to dominate, right? What are the three things I really want to do really, really well? One of those slots almost for sure has to go to grades, right? So you're already down one slot. You got two more to go. We all know how important 11th grade grades are, so I'm not going to lecture you about that. But it's like, okay, what are those other two things now? This is where the debate really starts happening. It's like, okay, well, am I trying to get rid of SAT or standardized testing this semester, right? A lot of kids, they went to summer programs for SAT or ACT, and now they're trying to get rid of it now during the fall, right? They had this kind of thought that they're just going to get their highest score somehow in the fall, which, by the way, doesn't always happen. But if that's the thing that you want to commit your second slot to, then there you go. You have one left, right? And so what is that final thing you want to do really, really well? And that's where it gets, pretty tricky, right? Some people are like, well, I got to do sports, but I also have to do club, and I'm also involved in this other thing like volunteering. And guys, the moment you get there is the moment everything starts falling apart. Do you guys see that? So I know it's hard, but really, really, really trying to choose the three things that you really want to do well, really, really well at any given point in time. And I think this is the problem with 11th grade is so many students are stretched where they're doing more than three things at the same time. And what ends up happening is something breaks, right? And especially coming out of COVID, everyone wants to be social and stuff, right? It's really easy to start sacrificing things like grades, because maybe you want to do the sport or the social thing a lot more, right? And so long story short, guys, don't make the mistake that I've seen so many kids make over the past 10, 15 years that I've been working with them, is to overstretch yourself in 11th grade, to burn yourself out, underperform on tests and finals, and all of a sudden you're treading water for the rest of the year. Just not a good place to be. It closes your college doors, right? Choose the three things you really, really, really want to focus on and dominate at any given point in time. And by the way, why I recommend thinking of it in terms of semesters is that way you can kind of break it up, right? For instance, maybe you have a sport that runs right now during the the fall or winter season, but maybe next semester, right, that sport is over. So that way then you can replace that slot with something else that might be more vital to you at that point in time, right? So just don't be the person though to say believe in in that you can maybe excel at all five things at the same time. Something's going to crack. You're only human. Two hands, two eyes, one brain, right? Just like the rest of us. So be realistic, right? Follow the rule of three. The second thing is what I call the technique of shelving, right? And I guess it's somewhat appropriate because I do have some shelves right here on this side, or I guess this side. Technically, I was pointing the wrong way. Shelving is this idea that, okay, it actually goes hand in hand with the rule of three. Let's say you say, okay, well, how do I get this down to three if I really want to do all four or all five, right? I want to do good in grades. I want to do good on my SAT. I want to do really well in swim, but I also want to do really well in volunteering. And I'm also involved in this, AI or robotics club. I want to do well in everything, right? It's like, well, guys, this idea of shelving is really useful because what it means is basically to put something on pause, or in other words, to just put a commitment that you have on the shelf for a second, right? And why I call it shelving is, oftentimes I think students think of everything as all or nothing, right? It's either I'm doing everything I can to do it right, or I'm not doing it at all and I have to quit, right? And this idea of, oh, if I quit though, that's going to make me look bad, or if I stop doing something after doing it for like so long, like 2 or 3 years, isn't that going to make me look bad in terms of continuity? And guys, the answer is no, it doesn't, right? Especially if it's only for like a semester. So, just because you stop something doesn't mean that you can't come back to it, just like a book. And by the way, that's kind of how I read a lot, by the way. It's like I'll start a book, I kind of lose interest after a little bit, or maybe I need some more time to mull over it. I'll just put it on the shelf and I'll come back to it when I'm ready, right? So that's kind of the way you can use or kind of think about extracurriculars that maybe you've been involved in for a long time. I know it might not always be easy, but trust me, okay, by following the rule of three, you're going to put yourself in a much better position to really do well in your grades and whatever you commit yourself to. And you're going to get sleep and time to be a kid and to relax, right? Otherwise, you're just going to overstretch yourself. So start learning how to shelf things and come back to them rather than seeing it as, okay, I'm going to quit and this is going to make me look bad, okay? And by the way, I've advised students, who shelved things like entire sports. Maybe they just said, you know what, instead of like, doing swim this season, I already have club swim like maybe later on in the year anyway, like I'm just going to do it then. Or sometimes people do the whole shelving for a whole year. They'll just say, you know what, I'm going to stop doing swim for 11th grade. I'm going to come back to in 12th grade because it's just too crazy right now, right? There are other 3 things in my slots that I'd rather dominate in. So, be realistic with yourself, and then also adopt the attitude of shelving things as opposed to quitting them, right? You can always come back to stuff later if you want. And the third and final tip is not so much a tip, it's just more so testing. How to understand which tests matter, okay? In this crazy grade, 11th grade, or if you're in 10th grade, I think it can also apply to you, right? There's a lot of tests that are swelling and people are talking about, whether that's the PSAT that's coming up in October, or that's actual official SAT attempts or ACT attempts, and obviously this AP test around the corner, right? I want to kind of emphasize, guys, which ones really matter and which ones don't, because I think when you're in high school, it's so easy to kind of get overwhelmed by thinking that everything is the end of the world, right? Everything is worth everything, right? And that's not true, right? Let's be completely honest. In today's test optional day, SATs and ACTs just aren't that important, okay? What's most important right now numerically is easily your grades, okay? So make sure to get that down. And I would argue second most important, it has to be your AP test scores if you're enrolled in any APs. Now, let me get a little bit more granular, okay? A lot of you guys are probably enrolled in a lot of different APs. Not all A's are equal and not all AP scores are equal. What does that mean? So if you are an engineering major, right, and you're enrolled in AP Push and AP Spanish and AP Physics and AP Calc, right, naturally, I'd rather see you excel and get 5s on AP Calc and, let's say, AP Physics than, say, have to try to get 5s on all 4 of them, if that makes any sense, right? I know it sounds strange because you're probably thinking in your head, man, I'm going to get 5s on all these anyway, right? I'm already preparing for them, right? Or maybe my class is already preparing for them. Guys, let me just tell you right now, I've worked with the best of the best of the best all around the world, and the chance of you getting a 5 on every single one of those tests practically is 0, right? Granted, it happens. Yeah, sure, some students get away with it, but almost always, from valedictorian to valedictorian, right, they don't get 5s on all these tests because they're so stretched thin. Think about it. You have not only your APs to think about, you have your grades to worry about, you have SAT and ACT, you have your extracurricular activities, you have life. There's a lot going on. And I just said a moment ago, right, rule of 3. So what I'm trying to say, guys, is, okay, get your numbers priorities straight. First things first, right? Make sure your grades are good. Make sure your AP, you're preparing well enough and focusing on the right APs that matter towards your major, especially if you know your major. And lastly, then, really comes in the SAT or ACT, right? Again, because that's an optional component. And again, you're already demonstrating your aptitude through your grades anyway, right? So APs nowadays kind of took the place of the subject test that used to be kind of there. And so now that the subject tests are gone, right, a lot of departments and admissions officers are kind of looking at your AP exam scores and attempts to kind of gauge your readiness for a particular major, especially if that major is technical in nature, right? So long story short, get your priorities straight when it comes to testing, okay? They don't all matter equally, right? if you need to kind of deprioritize already, guys, watch the shelve the SAT for next year, let's say the spring or maybe even next fall, right? In order to prioritize your grades and maybe your AP test results, go ahead and do that, right? And that's the last point I'm going to make, right? SAT, your timeline is much longer than just this current, you can say a calendar year, right? Or this academic year, right? You still have attempts in August and, obviously October and November, right? Even if you're applying early action decision or whatever, you still have attempts out there. Whereas, guys, you only have right now to get your current semester grades. You only have until next semester to get obviously your AP exam score straight. So think about it that way, right? Making sure that you're dedicating the right time towards the more urgent and important numbers, as opposed to trying to do all three of them, extremely well at the same time. Chances are, if you just focus on one thing at a time, you're going to do it way better than if you split your focus across like 2 or 3 things, right? So, to recap today, guys, we talked about the rule of 3. You have 3 slots to do really well in. And, if you were to choose to commit yourself doing anything more than 3 things at the same time, you're probably going to flop on 1 or if not 2 or 3 of them, right? So choose the 3 things you want to dominate and do them really well. Anything else that maybe you feel like, is kind of getting in the way of those 3 things, just shelve it for now, right? Shelve it and just put it on pause. You don't have to quit it. You're just going to shelve it for now so you can come back to it later, whether that's next semester, whether that's in the summertime of the next year, right? Or maybe even next academic year. Just shelve it. You're not going to be perceived as a quitter by anybody. You're just making a mature life decision and being realistic with yourselves because you want to do really well at the 3 things you committed to, right? So learning how to shelve is really important. And then lastly, guys, understanding and prioritizing which tests are important, right? The first things first is, I would argue, grades. Make sure your finals, right, and your tests that pertain to your grades are taken care of. Don't let things like SAT get in the way because you have so much more time to worry about the SAT, so many more attempts. Colleges don't care about when you get your highest score. They just want to see your highest single sitting score, or if they super score, fair enough. But you have so much more time for that. Focus right now on the tests that pertain to your grades. Focus right now on really doing well in the APs that matter. Okay, and if you're enrolled in 4 or 5 APs, right, I'd rather see you get 5s on the 2 that matter versus, let's say, 4s and 3s on all of them, right? Again, focusing on the stuff that matters, training smart, spending your time wisely, right? So again, the rule of 3, shelving and knowing which tests matter. I hope this really helps you, especially if you're 11th grade. Ever since we've been teaching these same kind of points of wisdom to our 11th graders, it seems like their life was a lot easier and more effective. They ended up getting much higher grades, higher test scores, and most importantly, more sleep. So I hope these techniques helped you guys. We'll definitely bring back more points of wisdom at certain points of the year. But until then, have a good one and happy Friday. See you guys.